I'm very happy to be talking to you, Sir Mark Tully. You are decorated by the Indian government as Padma Shri and also Padma Bhushan, and also by the British government. But I suppose talking to you gives me a special joy because this year India celebrates 75 years of independence, as also 50 years of 1971 war, the greatest war that was fought in South Asia, as I must say. And I think it is the greatest victory in the military history. So, Sir Mark Tully, sir, I would like to ask you about your experiences in your journey as an Indian citizen, but who represents BBC, but also British by birth and by character. So can I have your impressions about what do you think about your journey with the BBC in India and how the credibility of BBC got acknowledged, not only by normal citizens or worldwide by people, but also by the militaries, where actually they have been banking on the information of BBC, and they have also taken certain military decisions. So as we speak about the 1971 war, which we are talking about as 50 years of it, how do you think about your journey and the BBC, its credibility, and the military, wars that you covered? Can I have your opening remarks, Sir Mark Tully?
Well, that's a huge canvas, General Saab, but yeah, I mean, I would just say that I was, as you rightly say, born British in Calcutta, but I was very much educated in Britain from the age of 10 onwards. I joined the British Army as a national serviceman, and I then went to Cambridge University and got a degree in history and theology. And in all the time I was back in England, I never really thought I would come back to Britain again, because my family in India, my father was a businessman, and British businessmen were not being encouraged by the time I left university. So following in my father's footsteps didn't seem a possibility. So I got down to a career in social work and social science. And it was by a fluke that I joined the BBC, and then by another fluke that within a year of my joining, there was a vacancy in India, and I applied for that vacancy. And I always tell this story. When during my interview, I was told that you will obviously have one big advantage for this job because you were nearly 10 years living in India as a child, so you must have picked up a lot of Hindi. And I said, no, I didn't, because in those days, the British Raj children were encouraged very much to think of themselves as British and not as Indians. And we had a European nanny who made sure that I didn't speak too much to the servants and didn't learn any Hindi. But during the interview, after they'd asked us the question, and I'd given this explanation, I thought rather foolishly say, but I can say the nursery rhyme, Little Miss Muffet, in Hindustani. And I thought, well, that's past me for the job, but my luck held out, and I got the job. And from the moment I came back to India, and I smelt the smell of Malis cooking their lunch on cow dung stoves in Claridge's Hotel the very day I arrived there. That smell brought back memories of the servants' quarters in our house in Calcutta, where the same smell came. And the whole of my childhood ran through my head like an express train. And I formed the conviction from then onwards that there was something about special about India for me, and that has proved to be so.
So, Mark Tully, so I was talking to you about the credibility of the BBC, that even the military respected the information of the BBC, and some of the military commanders chose to bank on the BBC for taking certain decisions. How did BBC establish this credibility, or was it Mark Tully? What he said was respected as the most credible information. So can you please tell us what was the mantra behind it?
Well, it certainly wasn't Mark Tully, because the BBC, I was only the front guy for a lot of people, reporters, all sorts of people, our Hindi service in London, our colleagues who we used to call stringers, that's freelance journalists in different parts of India. My very good friend Satish Jacob, who worked with me for 20 years, and so on and so forth. I established a particular credibility simply because of the fact that I was heard broadcasting more than anyone else. And that was because of my position. As far as the BBC as a whole goes, it was a particular time in the history of broadcasting, and that's what helped us in all. Transistor radio had arrived, and therefore, just as now you see with the mobile telephone how quickly that spread, in the same way the transistor radio spread and made audible, and made it made it possible for many, many more people to listen to the radio. There was no television virtually a lot of the time. The only what I could call India-based radio was All India Radio. The only television was Doordarshan. And these were well known to be government-run bodies. And therefore, when people went to look for independent sources of news, they tended to turn to foreign broadcasting. And I think partly because we had been here for such a long time, the BBC, and partly because we did have a very good international reputation. And again, the only real competitor was VOA, Voice of America, or Russian broadcasting. But again, they too were very heavily identified with their governments. Whereas the BBC, we had this great strength of being an independent public corporation. And I've always argued that India would have a much better media landscape if they had an independent, really truly independent public corporation. And people know and understand what the broadcasting companies are that they are listening to. And they knew that, and they could hear from the product as well, that we were an independent organization. We were not an arm of the British government. So I think for those reasons, and then I have to add, I suppose, that it sounds like boasting, and I don't want to do that, but we wouldn't have had the audience we had if we hadn't got it reasonably right most of the time.
Absolutely. And I also realized that the time when you joined the BBC in India, that was 1964. And soon after that, India and Pakistan went to war in 1965. And thereafter, 1971. And those were the times when the Western world and the United States of America was seen to be siding Pakistan or the entire world was, Western world was siding Pakistan, and you were reporting in India. Were you being looked at somebody who would be covering the war from India as a person who would not be trusted as a reporter? Or how did you find yourself in a situation? Was it easy to report about war and talk about war? Because it is not only reporting, also is opinion making. I would ask you to tell me something about how you covered 1965 and 1971 war and your impressions of these wars.
Well, 1965, I wasn't in India until December, so I didn't cover 1965. So I just is that okay?
Absolutely perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. Yes. So I was in that party, and I remember we were given almost daily briefings by General Farman Ali, and we had in our party a very, very famous war correspondent called Claire Hollingworth of the Daily Telegraph, and our briefings were very much occupied by Claire and the Pakistani general discussing tactics, military history, and all the rest of it. But he was the number two. We never met General Niazi, who was the number one. But then I went back to London, and I was the chief commentator for the BBC in London on South Asia. Was collecting all the reports we could get from Bangladesh or East Pakistan, and from India and the refugee situation and all that, and putting them together in comparatively short dispatches type things, which could be broadcast from London. So I was sitting in London doing this, but again, of course, I benefited hugely by the fact that every day my job was to do one of these and to broadcast it. And so, of course, my name became extremely well known because of this fact, not because of anything I did particularly. And that was my experience. And then as soon as Sheikh Saab was released and Sheikh Saab went to Dhaka, I flew to Dhaka, and I was one of the first people to interview Sheikh Saab when he landed in Dhaka after his imprisonment in Rawalpindi. So that was my experience in that war.
So, Mark Tully, you very clearly said that something went terribly wrong, and on the western side of Dhaka, you saw most of the villages being burnt. What was the compulsion for the Pakistan army to be so brutal to the people of East Pakistan? After all, they were all unarmed and innocent people, the children, the women, and all that they've done is completely not acceptable. What is there in the Pakistan army which makes them repeatedly behave in a particular manner? So what are your impressions of the Pakistan army from that perspective?
Well, I think, and this was confirmed in the book, which I was telling you about by Colonel Saleh, well, he was Major Saleh in those days. First of all, you have to remember that for a fortnight or so before the crackdown, the army and the Pakistan government had virtually lost control over East Pakistan. And it was virtually being ruled by Sheikh Saab and his followers. And so the situation was very desperate from the Pakistan army and Pakistan government's point of view. And of course, the Pakistan government was governed at that time by an army man who was the president of Pakistan General. And then what happened after that, of course, was in this reaction, there was a great deal of anger in the Pakistan army because here were these people and wanting to break up the Pakistan Army's country. And you as a soldier, I'm sure, could imagine the anger you would feel if you found a majority, actually, in numerical terms, trying to break up the country. So there was anger, which was one of the reasons, I think. There was panic as well. And one of the reasons for increasing the panic were the mutinies in the East Bengal Regiment among Bengali officers. Reason for anger was, of course, the feeling that in some sense this was all another sense for this, another reason for this anger was the feeling that in the Pakistan Army that India was in some way involved in this. And as you know, the Pakistan Army is passionately anti-Indian, if I can put it that way. Another reason for it was what I had said earlier, that there were many Pakistan, unfortunately, officers and others who despised Bengalis and saw nothing wrong really in what was happening. Those reasons, and of course, they believed, as you would know better than me, but as sometimes soldiers appear to believe, that giving someone a taste for the whip or the strong arm tactics is the way to bring back a situation into control again. But I would stress that we have to really remember what the Pakistan Army was facing in terms of its morale, its discipline, and everything, in the way that it was facing the loss of more than half its population.
Sir, you traveled in the Western Pakistan as well, and in 90s you also made a movie, Karachi to Khyber Pass. What is the character of Pakistan Army and its people? When you talk about how people think of Pakistan now, they're blaming Pakistan for everything wrong they have done, as a terrorist state being called for running proxy war, supporting all that could go wrong as far as terrorism is concerned. So what are your impressions of Pakistani people and Pakistani army? And then can you relate their character with what happened in East Pakistan? So it is not what you saw in East Pakistan per se, but also what you saw in Pakistan of the western part of it, about the people and the army. What is your general impression about people as such and their army?
Well, I can talk about my memories of Pakistan, but since I left the BBC, the Pakistan government did not give me a visa, and because I think they thought the fact that I was living independently, not with the BBC, in India had made me an Indian. But my memories of Pakistan and what I've read about it since and what goes on as well, I think the heart of this tragedy lies in partition, and the Pakistan armies and Pakistan's foreign policy as well is almost not entirely exclusively, but very, very heavily focused on India and on anti-Indian sentiment. And it's already been my view that we can't just blame Pakistan for this. that I don't think India has made enough effort on all occasions when it could to improve the situation with Pakistan. But going back to Pakistan, I think the army, there are so many similarities when I was there. And the same changes were taking place as taking place in the Indian army. I think of two in particular. I think of one, the recruiting area being expanded. The British army, Indian army in what is now Pakistan, recruited heavily in Northwest Frontier province, but most heavily in what you might call North Punjab and in the area of Rawalpindi, which was, of course, the headquarters of the army. But the recruitment has spread to South Punjab, and to some extent to Sindh and to Balochistan. And in India, as you know better than I, the recruiting is no longer so heavily focused on what were known as the martial races, the North Indians, the Punjabis, largely, and people like Dogras and the Gurkhas. You would realize you raised the Maha Regiment, for instance. So that change is coming about. But the big difference, and we have to stress this, and it's the most important difference by a long way, is that the Pakistan Army has almost from the start involved itself in politics. And has been the actual government of Pakistan for many years, for long years since independence. Whereas the Indian Army, as you know better than I do, General Saab, has always remained above politics and has remained what was called an apolitical army. And that, in my view, makes an enormous difference to a country and to an army as well. Once an army starts getting involved in governing a country, then its officers they get posted in the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is corrupt, so the officers get corrupted. They get used to what I might call a good old British Army term, a cushy style of life. And the whole military thing tends to become less tight, less disciplined, less effective. I think that has happened to some extent with the Pakistan Army. And I think the other thing I would say is that I don't think the average Pakistani, if one can say this, in the days when I traveled around, they were not focused entirely on being anti-Indian or anything like that. And in Punjab, you would find often people regretting partition and wanting to be able to go back to their home villages in the other side of the border in Punjab. And when I did a program on the most recent anniversary of partition, I did a series of programs for the BBC as a freelancer. And we went to the Indian side of Punjab because I couldn't get into the Pakistani side. And there I found in places like Tarantaran and those sort of places in Punjab, very near the border, again, a widespread wish that partition had not occurred and that they could go back to their home villages and see them and all the rest of it. And those few who had the opportunity to do that for various reasons thoroughly welcomed the opportunity. So my hope and belief is that the hostility between India and Pakistan, which I don't think can be entirely blamed on Pakistan, although people won't necessarily like me for saying that, but one has to say what one believes in. I think if that could be resolved, then it would make an enormous difference to the whole of South Asia. And one of the weaknesses of South Asia, one of the reasons it is still a comparatively backward area, is because it has not taken advantage of its regional, basic, fundamental regional strengths. And regional trade, multilateral regional trade, has been shown to be a very important way of developing economies.
Very interesting aspects of people thinking differently than the army in Pakistan. I suppose the hatred towards India is of the Pakistan army and not so much by the people of Pakistan. But at the same time, don't you realize that the social fabric of Pakistan itself is fractured? There is a distrust, and the only gluing factor is the Pakistan army. If the Pakistan army did not rally people around hating India, I suppose Pakistan would break up. How would you think the role of Pakistan army in keeping Pakistan the way it is, or without the Pakistan army being strong, and as you say, they are the government, how would you see Pakistan if the army wasn't so strong?
Well, I think the army is the cause of the weakness, actually. I think Pakistan could perfectly well be a democracy. It has been to have periods of democracy. It's the army. And, you know, if you think about it, General Sutherland, you must have thought about it much more deeply than I do. But there's hardly a place I can think of in the world where the army intervening in the way the army has done in Pakistan has led to the establishment of a peaceful democratic country. And if you look in Pakistan, democracy has been consistently interrupted by the army. Myanmar is another example. And you look in the Middle East, you look in Egypt, you look at the position there, for instance, where the army has intervened, and you've now got what sort of a book I've just been reading indicates is a one-man government by a military general. So I don't think it's the Pakistan army. I think it is the cause rather than the savior.
Very interesting aspect that you brought about Pakistan army being the weakness of the nation. But how would you rate a Pakistani soldier or a unit when it is weak inside, yet they are in power? You would have done war reporting. How would you think that the Pakistan military would fight or has fought? And what have you seen of them during your war reporting?
Well, you know, I'm not a war reporter. I haven't done a huge amount of war reporting. I mean, my main period of war reporting was that time in Bangladesh or East Pakistan. And I really wouldn't like to comment on I mean, all I know is that you hear of actions of great bravery by people in the Pakistan army, just as you do by people in the Indian army as well. So I really wouldn't like to assess the bravery of either army.
So, Mark Tully, with your 30 years of experience in BBC in India, Can you tell me your high or not so high points? I would not call them low points, but you can talk about certain significant memories which you would talk about if asked to talk about two or three things about your life in India as a BBC bureau chief. How would you look at your journey, and what are the memories which throw up certain perspective on India or on South Asia?
Wow, that's a big one. Yeah, I mean, I have seen a lot of major events in this country. And I suppose most of them, the big ones, most of them have been sad. Assassination of Indira Gandhi, assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, and the Bhopal gas disaster, among others. I often ask this question, and I sometimes say that for me, one of the very sad occasions was the event in Ayodhya when the mosque was pulled down, because I do believe profoundly that one of the great geniuses of India is to accommodate all the religions of the world, and something which goes so blatantly against that spirit, which I think is such an important spirit for the whole world to learn from India, was a sadness, great sadness to me personally, because I've always, in my writing, in my broadcasting, talking, always upheld this idea that of India, one of the greatnesses of India lies in its religious tolerance and in its ability to allow all the religions of the world to live together. So that was one of the, for me, very sad occasions. Another very sad occasion was the Bhopal gas disaster. And that's an interesting one as well, because when we got message of the gas disaster, all the correspondents based in Delhi went straight away as quickly as we could to Bhopal. I caught the overnight train. Of course, one of the features of the gas disaster was that no one knew what the gas was. And one of the biggest charges which should be levied against Union Carbide is that they were refusing to say what the gas might be. So if you think about it, we had gone into Bhopal without any thought about what we might be breathing in and whether that would be good for us. And even though it had already killed a lot of people. Now, in journalism nowadays, I think the health and safety officials of the BBC, for instance, would have told me, you can't go in until you've got a gas mask, until you found out what the gas was and everything. But why was that sad? Well, of course it was sad because of the huge loss of life, and also because not just loss of life, but health challenges for the rest of their lives of people. And I saw literally cartloads of bodies being taken to be buried or cremated. I saw the main hospital patients laid out on the lawn because there wasn't room for them. I had arguments with the Union Carbide doctor who was there, saying, you have to tell us what this gas is. I got the impression that the gas from what we're picking up from other places, that the gas was some form of cyanide, and that the Union Carbide thought that there would be real panic if, and really bad for their name, if it was thought that they were spreading cyanide. So all that suffering, all that unwillingness of the Union Carbide to collaborate even after this disaster. And finally, it was a tragic reminder of the cold-heartedness, is all I can say, of some Indian politicians. Because what had happened was that the town plan had said there should be a very considerable distance left empty surrounding this factory, just in case exactly what happened did happen. But the Congress Party, in order to win votes, had allowed Jhuggi Jhompri type constructions to come right up to the road going around the factory. And it was a real tragedy to see little Congress flags fluttering from these Jhuggi Jhompris, and knowing that the owners were dead. And the flags were flying, the Congress flag, because the election, as you remember, was just before the Rajiv Gandhi election. So it's always been a reminder to me of how irresponsible and I say cruel Indian politicians can be.
Very, very insightful, and also I would say not so happy moments that you are describing. Obviously, there is much more that is there that you have seen and you could talk about.
Well, I wasn't always sad. There were many occasions when I was very happy as well.
So what is your happiest moment in your reporting, if I may ask you?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my happiest moments was when I came back to India after the emergency, because during the emergency, we were expelled from India because we refused to accept censorship. And when Indira Gandhi announced the election, she also said that foreign correspondents could come back. So you imagine my happiness to be coming back, and I have been back ever since that occasion. So that was really a very, very happy occasion for me.
At the age of 86 or near 86, you would be actually looking at what you saw and how the South Asian affairs have shaped up. Are you a little concerned about how the future could be, that the security situation in the area is not very good, and one can describe this area one of the most dangerous places in the world, where when the militaries get enmassed on the borders and people talk about the war and what is happening in Afghanistan, Pakistan area, how do you look at the future? How do you think it could unfold?
Well, I believe strongly that it is perfectly possible that the future will unfold roughly as it's going now, where the situation will be unsatisfactory, dangerous, but not fatal. And I think any talk of Pakistan becoming a collapsed country or collapsed nation, as you sometimes hear, is not only exaggerated, but also would be very, very bad for India because of the instability you would have right on your borders, and the impact this would have in India would be disastrous, in my view. I think this part of the world, and particularly Bangladesh, has, and of course coastal India, could face severe problems from climate change, unless the rate of climate heating does not decrease. And that's why this Glasgow summit, which is going to take place, is so important. On the security side, obviously, the fact that India and Pakistan are hostile to each other and both have nuclear capability is considered, and rightly considered, a very dangerous factor. But I believe and hope and pray that I'm right, that this capability will not be used by either side. And as far as the whole question of terrorism goes, well, yes, obviously Pakistan has been housing terrorists. Pakistan has been housing the Taliban. Pakistan has sent terrorists into Kashmir, and there's no doubt about this. But if one analyzes the cause of this, and if only we'd all sit down, the Pakistanis as well, and see the cause of this, why is it being done? It is fundamentally because of this hostility that Pakistan feels towards India. And if this could in some way be resolved, think what a different place South Asia would be.
So you hope that situation between India and Pakistan can improve, and certain problems that are so significantly unsolvable, you think that you have a hope that they can be solved?
Well, I have in one way I don't have a hope, because I've seen so many efforts, I've covered so many Indo-Pakistan talks, I've seen so many times when things go, the Manmohan Singh, for instance, I've seen times of optimism, and I've seen the dreary fall back into hostility again. And I can't be optimistic, but when you see the times when the cloud does break, clouds do break, and the sun shines, you realize that it can, if it can shine in those times, why can't it go on shining all the time? So that's the way I would look at it. And I would hope to God that Pakistan does, yes, shed its anti-Indian attitude. But then India also has to look and see at what cost it is to India that it has, that Pakistan has this attitude, and what it would cost India to change that attitude, and whether it would be worth doing that. That's, I think, the conundrum which India has to think about. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's something which should always be borne in mind.
On the occasion of 50 years of 1971 war, 50 years have gone past. With what we have been talking about, do you have any message that you would want to leave for all those who participated in the war, the losses which have happened, the gains which happened or did not? Do you have any message in the war and the aftermath?
I don't know that I'm the right person to give a message. There should be prime ministers, presidents, and very grand people, not rather ancient, as you said, journalists. But no, I would say I have a prayer rather than a message. My prayer is that this wonderful part of the world called South Asia, where people from all corners of South Asia have so much in common, can find ways of living together, living in peace and working together for prosperity. That would be my prayer.
Sir Mark Tully, wonderful talking with you. And we shall soon connect with you to talk about more of the areas where security concerns are really discussed, and you've seen things from close quarter. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your spending time with me on this conversation.
Thank you very much, Dennis.